Hello, I'm Sally Wiener Grotta, and this is What If, Why Not, How? Where I ask people who have interesting stories and ideas questions that are on my mind. Today, my guest is Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman. Mark has served as the spiritual leader for Brit Shalom Jewish Center of Erie, Pennsylvania since 2018, and lives and teaches in Pittsburgh, PA, which is on the other side of the state from me. He's been a Jewish educator for over 20 years, and his students include folks from 10 to 93. Wonderful span. At Congregation Beth Shalom, he's the instructor for Introduction to Judaism and sponsors and mentors people who are on a path toward becoming Jewish. His book, Life Lessons from Recently Deceased Rabbis, and when we're talking about millennia of history, recently deceased is in the past couple hundred years. Life Lessons from Recently Deceased Rabbis. Hashadut for the people. Hashadut refers to the Hasidic lessons, which is a group of a group of Jews that live passionately. This book was published last year by Bayit, who are the same folks who published my book, Daughters of Eve, and that's how Mark and I met. And there it is. Yep, there we have both our books. He has said that he likes texts from the Hasidic tradition in particular because they probe our own personal stories and struggles by using Torah as a vehicle for self-examination. And his book has been praised for offering spiritual and moral guidance for the next generation. Quote, an independent and bold generation that is more diverse, more feminist, thank you, more queer, more individualistic, and perhaps more reflective than ever before, unquote. And having dipped into it, it's a very dense, fascinating read, but having dipped into it, it deserves all the raves it's getting. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining me today, and congratulations on the reactions you're getting on your books. It's exciting.
Thanks. It's been a wild ride and a lot of fun. You of all people understand what it's like to write a book and also to kind of like conceive of it and risk it. I think one of the interesting things about writing, you're a more seasoned writer than I. You've written more things than I. But one of the challenges that you learn when you begin to write, I started writing newspaper articles for submission to like magazines and newspapers. Mm-hmm. and op-eds, and you have to risk. You have to, yes. And you have to risk disappointment. You put yourself out there and you say, I really believe in this thing. I'm going to write this thing down, and then I'm going to send it to other people and say, do you think this is anything, or is this like not worthy of you? And a dozen times they'll tell you it's not worthy. I don't know why you thought this was a good idea to waste your time on. You should have just gotten paid $9 an hour to dig ditches. But, instead you risked it and you tried it and you took rejection a bunch of times. And then eventually someone else found value in it. And then they brought it into the world. So that happens on a small level with op-eds and magazine articles and newspaper articles. And then when you write a book, it's a big risk. So harder than the writing is the fear of rejection. And then once you kind of overcome that and you say, I'm going to be rejected 10 times, but that 11th time is going to be magic. Then you're ready to be.
Yeah. I have to tell you, Mark, that whole idea of an imposter syndrome doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away ever, especially when you're tired or you hit a point in your book where you're going, I need to fix this. Now, how in heavens? It doesn't go away. But eventually you do learn in the rejection aspect of it that it isn't always a rejection of the book. It's saying this book does not fit the balance of what we're trying to achieve right now.
Right. And it's not for every audience. And the person who picked it up and couldn't figure out what to do with it was just the wrong person at the wrong time. Yes. One of the lines in Torah and prayer that I love the most because it fits my life. I think it's in my book at least once or twice. Is the line that we use at it's a line that we use on holidays when we take the Torah out. Uh, that it's something is et ratzon, that it has the desired time, that it's the right moment, and right, like not every moment in our lives is et ratzon. It's not always, the anvil is not always hot for the striking, shall we say? And so,
Yes.
wrong person, wrong time is a whole idea that applies to authors like you and I.
Or the ugly duckling in the wrong pond who's really a swan.
Yeah,
I always liked that one of my mentors gave me.
right.
Now, Mark, you and I in some ways have been on very parallel journeys with these two books. We came at it from very different places and with somewhat different purposes. But I feel we had similar experiences regarding what we found along the way. I've been exploring the women of the Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh as we call it, such as Eve, Sarah, Hagar, Ruth, Naomi, and such, to try to understand how traditional interpretations have defined what civilization, Western civilization, expected a one and woman to be, as well as how we can now look at the same stories to explore who we truly are and who we may yet become. I felt there was a lot of that in your book. I also, along the way, I found a deep appreciation of my Jewish heritage and the layers of meaning that every story offers. I definitely see that in your book. And I feel there's so much similar. What's more, our books by our editor, Rachel Barenblatt, who is a fabulous editor, helped us design our books as, well, as discussion, workbooks, journaling guides, your life lessons from recently dead rabbis. I love that title. It's meant as something individuals or groups would use weekly to explore the week's Torah portion. And my book, Daughters of Eve, has 12 modules, each consisting of a personal essay related to women of the Bible, plus relevant questions. That means that groups that meet once a month would also have a year's worth of material to discuss. We'll go into several of the themes that I think we share, but one that I feel is very important is the exploration of morality, ethics, and the nature of being human, which is an overarching theme I think we both touch. I would love us to give examples to our audience by reading portions of the book that refer to the creation stories of Genesis, or as we say in Hebrew, Bereshit. And before you read, please give some context to the reading.
Yeah, I just want to say before you go on, one of the things that's wonderful about our books, mine, I think came out before yours.
Yes.
And I remember in the editing process, both Rachel and the rest of the editorial team at Bayit really liked the framing of each of my chapters, which often begins with a question that the kind of reader can ponder while they read it. And one of the things that came up was this question about the question, should we leave some blank space in the book so that people can journal along with it? And I kind of thought about it, and I ultimately went, it's really not the way that I kind of conceived of it. I thought that if a person was going to read it, they would read it on their own, but have the guiding question. Or if a group read it, they would discuss the question, but it wouldn't need to be written down. So I was really thrilled to see that your book has blank pages in it with a question, because it's the same idea. And I think the other thing you said at the beginning was, our books are siblings, that they go through the Torah portion of the week or a specific reading, and they ask questions, they engage the reader, and they ask the reader to ask their own questions about how they could use the text as a pivot for spiritual growth. So we'll see that in your reading, because I know I read your chapter on Bereshit, and I loved it. On Adam and Eve, and so I will read you mine. My book follows the traditional format of the weekly lectionary, as they say in English, the weekly reading of the Torah portion. And we start in the book of Bereshit. So the Bible, of course, opens with the creation of the world, and there's this wonderful text. So the format of my book is there's a little snippet of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. and then there is a commentary by a Hasidic rabbi, and then afterwards there's an explanatory essay by me that's trying to either reiterate what the rabbi says in plain spoken language, or is trying to build off of that, or both. And one of the most common things that gets asked in a reading, or even by people who are trying to buy the book, is how am I supposed to use this book? Like, what do you want? And I have lots of people in the local community who've told me how they use it. I have friends who keep it by the bedside and read like one chapter a week for the weekly Torah portion. I have people who've read it all the way through. I have people who read the complicated traditional text and then discuss it with others. I have other people who don't feel that the traditional text is easy enough for them, so they just read the explanatory essays and they just read that from front to back. And so it's really great because the style engages readers on multiple levels. So, okay. So our first essay is our first chapter, which is only, don't worry, a page and 2 pages long, is about Breshit. So the text of the Torah that our commentator, the Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Alter of Slobodka, is going to comment on is this. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara oto, zachar nekeva bara otam. Translation. And God created man in God's image. In the image of God was he created, male and female, God created them. Our Hasidic text, so as you mentioned, the Hasidic rabbis are a bunch of rabbis who lived from the 18th and 19th and even in the 20th centuries. Their genre of literature was overwhelmingly to take text and make it personal and spiritual, and to inject themselves into the narrative of the Bible as if they were the characters themselves, which your reading on Adam and Eve is going to do, I think, in a big way. You'll see. So our first rabbi, Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, is actually, I cheated a little. He's not exactly Hasidic. He's what I call Hasidic adjacent. So the Hasidic rabbis had this philosophy of kind of joy and love and personal meaning. They also kind of had a radical spiritualism towards God that at the time of Judaism in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a fairly dry, legalistic, somewhat joyless religion at the time. Put your head down and be humble and be focused and be intellectual and engage in the text and don't ask questions and don't sing, don't dance, and just, like mumble and go to work, right? And these guys are like, let's take some time, let's be joyful, let's take it slow, and let's ask questions about what would it be like if I were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. So our guy Nosson Tzvi Finkel was a Musar rabbi. That's why he's Hasidic adjacent. And
could you give Musar a definition of Musar?
Yeah. So Musar is sometimes it's translated as ethics, which I think is a not very helpful translation. Musar are kind of self-effacing, humility-focused rabbis. They're kind of almost ascetic in some practices, which I'm not a huge ascetic myself. All my soccer scarves behind me going to sporting events. But they really believe that the core of human existence should be learning to be humble. And by making the self kind of contained, respectful, and humble, you could learn to love others. And so he had that kind of philosophy. Nosson Tzvi Finkel lived in Lithuania and Poland, and then he emigrated to the land of Israel in the early 1920s, and he died there in 1927. His yeshiva was in Hebron. It moved to Jerusalem. It is still there to this day. So you can go to the Slobodka yeshiva even now. So anyways, back to our guy. And God created human in God's image. In the image of God was he created. So from here on out, it's the words of Rabbi Nosson Tzvi. We cannot overlook or dismiss understanding this verse in Torah. We must seek every reflective and contemplative depth that exists within it. That while there is the existence of a physical manifestation of the divine, quote, before our eyes, there is a form of a divine body and a need for corporeality, for physicality. But meanwhile, hidden is the spiritual being, a dynamic creation, that this is an aspect of the Creator. From this concept, it is forbidden for us to dismiss this understanding for a moment. It is the foundation of all the foundations of Torah Judaism. According to this Torah, humankind was designed to be a witness that testifies to the manifest reality of the divine in the universe. The creation must give testimony to its creator, not in speech and in action, but rather to the very fiber of its existence, in its innermost being as well as its outermost form. It is the testimony of humankind to elevate and to reach to the realm of the spiritual and the moral, that they must recognize and comprehend the image between themselves and their master. Every human can reach this spiritual level, not just special individuals who are gifted. To every person, there are the sparks of the divine. Every human is able to merit the revealing of the divine in their soul. So up to there, it's his words. And then here is my essay to kind of riff and explain.
And by the way, I love the title of this one too.
Oh, thank you. The bespoke human designed to be exactly the way you are. That's the title. There is no more radical concept in all of Torah than the statement that humans were created in the divine image. As many great teachers have shown me, that simple sounding statement tells us that every living being has the potential of God, God's self, and was handcrafted to be exactly as they were by the divine. They have infinite value and sanctity, and they were purpose-made to be the way they are. That has radical implications for kindness and compassion, and for attempting to understand our fellow human. For years, we understood that kids with ADD should just take meds to become normal, that gays could go to therapy to be, quote, normal, that a person born to a male body, but who felt at their core a female, couldn't possibly transition. Every person was meant to conform to a set of societal norms imposed upon them by the sometimes arbitrary standards of the day, how to be neurotypical or fit in or be normal. Torah rejects that notion. We are meant to glorify the Creator, quote, to the very fiber of our existence, by being uniquely ourselves. To quote the Talmud in Sanhedrin, for a man strikes many coins, and each one is the same, but God strikes many coins in the image of the divine, and each one is different. Diversity is hardwired into the universe's plan. So be you, damn it. God created you to be as you are, physically, mentally, and emotionally. That's not to say we aren't meant to refine ourselves. God created wheat, but that doesn't stop us from grinding it into flour, combining it with water and yeast, and turning it into tasty bread. We are also meant to refine ourselves spiritually, to improve ourselves by finding our connection with the universe. In the words of the altar of Slobodka, Hayetzer tzarich laha'id beyotzro. The creation needs to testify to its creator. We seek understanding and appreciation of that which created us in order to fully elevate our spiritual selves to the highest levels we can attain. You are of infinite worth and value. No matter how flawed or imperfect or down you may get about yourself, you must always acknowledge and remember this principle, which is at the fiber of your very being.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Mark. What a meaningful and layered and lovely perspective. Thank you for reading that. That was marvelous.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read my first essay from Daughters of Eve, and
I'm going to read along. quietly to myself.
Okay. The story of humanity's exile from the Garden of Eden has a bittersweet allure. Who doesn't dream of being welcomed back to paradise where illness and hunger didn't exist, death was unknown, and life was gentle? All of creation was the embodiment of goodness, as God proclaimed repeatedly in the opening sections of Genesis. But did Adam and Eve experience good? Could they understand what goodness was when they had known nothing else? Given her inexperience and naivete, Eve's decision to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil could be said to be more a whim than an informed choice. However, thanks to that one action, we now know both good and evil and everything in between. So if you could be magically transported into Eve's body before she reached for the fruit, would you pick it and eat it? To not eat would mean to be immortal, protected, and forever innocent. To eat would mean death for you and all your descendants and struggling every moment of your short life. You'd be awake to good and evil, kindness and hurt, love and hate, and all the passions and needs that would beset your flesh and spirit. My friend Saroj recently told me she wouldn't eat the fruit. She'd love to return to paradise. The comfort and beauty of the Garden of Eden would be pure joy for her, and she would delight in the wonders it would offer. I believe if Eve had known what awaited her outside the gates of paradise, and if she had the capacity to understand what privation, pain, and death were, she would have agreed with Saroj and would never even looked at the tree of knowledge of good and evil. On the other hand, Lilith, the woman who legend says was Adam's unyielding first wife, fled the Garden of Eden, choosing to be free from his dominance, even if it meant being damned for all eternity. In recent years, Lilith's choice has often been framed not in terms of a man's presence or the existence of any dominant authority, but because her deepest hunger would never be satisfied by what Eden would offer. And most days, I tend to agree with Lilith, because my joy requires the freedom to exercise my mind, spirit, and body fully. I would taste the fruit and relish its flavors and textures, just as I embrace the pleasure and pain that every moment of life offers me. I prefer to be awake, to know, and to understand. I may make choices that are sometimes moral and sometimes selfish, but every choice, and especially every mistake, is mine based on who I am and what I have learned over the years. More importantly, each choice can teach me who I might become. Then there are the days when life feels so unrelenting. That's when I fantasize about living in the Garden of Eden, where kindness would reign and every human need would be anticipated and provided for by a loving caretaker God. Given the level of food insecurity and hunger suffered by millions, the inexorable horrors of war and conflict, the evils of domination and inequality, and the pain and suffering of illness. Given all that humanity suffers, the appeal of a return to Eden is undeniable. While in the Garden of Eden, Eve and Adam were carefree creatures, practically indistinguishable from the other animals who shared paradise's bounty. But with no want or worry, could such an existence offer any opportunity to learn or grow, to become thinking individuals who question and seek to understand? And given that Adam and Eve had no choices or cares while in Eden, could they have developed a sense of morality if they had remained in paradise? Seen through those lenses, Eve's decision to eat the fruit could be said to have been the metaphorical first step in our evolution to become fully human. So, very different from your reading, and yet it comes to very similar kinds of senses of joy and embracing our humanness, the full body of who we are.
Yeah. You asked this great question. Knowing what you know of the world, would you have eaten the fruit? Why or why not? But the other thing that you kind of like, there's so many sentences in here with questions. So they lead the reader to be in the shoes of Eve herself, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And I think it's their second to last question, really. Given that Adam and Eve had no choices or cares while in Eden, could they have developed a sense of morality if they'd remained in paradise? I love that question of this idea that the Garden of Eden is paradise minus morality, right? It doesn't involve free will or making choices, or if it does have free will, it's a kind of a very odd free will in which none of the choices matter, right? Or they're mortal, so their choices are like, do you want to have the pears or the figs today? You know what I mean? Like, they have choice, but it's all irrelevant, and it's a very interesting paradox of like life in a difficult world involves choices that have meaning, but paradise sounds great, but none of the choices ultimately result in anything.
They have no meaning. They also have no repercussions. It doesn't change the path that you're on for the rest of your eternity.
Yeah, I have a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old and a dog. I recently have a dog, and one of the things that the kids are slowly learning, and the dog probably never will, although is slowly learning, is they don't have responsibilities yet. And the downside to responsibility is it's a burden. It carries anxiety and pressure, right? People expect things of you and I, and that can be a little bit difficult, but it's also wonderful. It's really wonderful to have people counting on me and relying on me, and to then choose what I'm going to do and what I'm going to say, and then for those choices to play themselves out, because that's interesting. And it leads to growth and change and decision making. And those are actually all enjoyable things.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. My next question you've been covering for a while was about the parallels of our books. But what I found interesting is that your book has been acknowledged as a spiritual path for a very diverse readership. Includes women, gays, other traditionally marginalized individuals, though the original texts have been intended to be interpreted as focused on the needs and interests of straight Jewish men, period.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Everybody else was outside that. I'm curious what your path was into taking these texts that had been interpreted over the millennia and moving forward with them with this more modern perspective, because it's something I struggled with, but I loved the challenge of it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear what you went through.
Well, it's an old question on some level. So when I was interviewing for rabbinical school, which is now, I'm a young looking man, but I'm not young. It was 22 years ago I interviewed to go to rabbinical school. And the only line that was really like a banger that I wrote that was a good one was I said something, I think in one of my essays, about taking the old dusty books off the shelf and making them new and relevant again. And to some degree, that's what this book is. But even more so in the sense that, like, so, Torah is, and Jewish books in general are a kind of a niche genre of books of kind of religious and spiritual self-help. But many of them have been like chewed over many times. A lot of the kind of more famous rabbis or the Talmud or the Torah itself have been, commented on and reviewed a lot. The interesting thing about Hasidic literature is that most of the texts, have never been translated. So one of the jokes that I make about my book to people, and when I teach my class, so I'm still translating this kind of literature every week for a class that's offered online and in Pittsburgh. And I sometimes joke and I say, listen, I don't pretend to be the smartest guy or the most brilliant Hasidic scholar of a generation, but I am the only guy who's translating this text right now. So this book, on some level, is the only version of these texts that are read in English on the planet. They just don't exist. And so the other thing that's interesting is, like, one of the talents of a rabbi, or the challenges of a rabbi, is just having a really good library and knowing what's in the library and being a good librarian and saying, like, oh, you have a question about this? Well, you want this book, and you point there and here and so on. So I'll tell you one quick story that'll kind of ram this home and end this soliloquy, which is, how did this book get published? It's a great story, and it answers your question. So I started. So the way you get it, you write a book, or the way you sell a book is you either write the book and then sell it, or you come up with the idea for the book and you try to find a publisher who wants it. And the first line for those of us who go the very traditional way is you try and find what's called a literary agent. And a literary agent is an agent. There's someone who says, I have this client, they've got a great book, you should buy it. And so I started down that path, and I found 85 literary agents who work exclusively in religious literature. Oh. And I filled out their what are called queries, one by one by one. And every query for every literary agent is different. So it took me, some days I could do 1 or 2 or 3. I think the most I ever did on one day was like 5, because they were all like identical. And I went through, slowly over a period of several months, writing, 85 literary queries. And at the beginning of the process, I reached out to a friend of mine who I knew had published 5 books and had a literary agent. And so I wrote to my friend Rachel Barenblatt, and I said, hey, Rachel, I'm starting the query process. Do you have any advice about what a book proposal should look like? And so on. And she said, sure. Why don't you send me yours and I'll give you my notes? And so I sent her my book proposal for Life Lessons for Recently Dead Rabbis, $22 online at Amazon. And she said, fix this, change that, edit this, spell this out better, but you look good. And I was like, great, thank you. So a couple months later, I get an email from Rachel, and she says, hey, it was a text actually. Did you sell your book to a literary agent yet? I said, no, I'm still looking. Why do you ask? And she said, well, funny thing. So the publisher, Bayit, our editorial board, our board of trustees, we meet regularly online, and we do a little Jewish learning. And we've been doing Jewish learning of Hasidic books in translation. And the first book they had read was called The Holy Fire, which is a translation of a great rabbi who's in the pictures. He's this guy. His name's the Eish Kodesh, the Kalonymus Kalman Shapira of Piasetzna. He's a very popular rabbi in the Hasidic world over the last 20 years. And then they finished that book. And then they turned to another book, a translation by Art Green called The Language of Truth, which was one of the inspirations for my book. And it's a translation of the Sfat Emet, who was the third Gerer Rebbe. And they finished that book, and one of the board members turned to the others and said, hey, this is great. What Hasidic book in translation are we reading next? And another board member turned to the others and said, well, that's it. There are no other Hasidic books in translation. We've read them all. And Rachel turns to them and says, I happen to know a guy who just wrote a book of Hasidic works in translation, but he hasn't been published. And the board members looked at each other and said, oh, we should consider publishing him. So Rachel turned to me and said, would you consider us publishing your book? And that's how the book got published.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful.
So there was a need in the universe for this book. And
yes. That's a delightful one. In your book, one of the questions you ask as part of the section that you read was, what does it mean to exist? What does the fact of our having been created mean in regards to obligation to be grateful to the simple fact of existing, or perhaps to the thing that created us? And, to me, of course, gratitude and joy do come in hand in hand. I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts of where you were taking your reader to with those questions.
Yeah, it's a great question. So both in college and in rabbinical school, one of the things that modern kind of more liberal rabbis do, but even traditional rabbis, I know Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was out of Yeshiva University, one of his great philosophical works is in this genre, is existential philosophy, right? The problem of existence, right? We were created, we have to find meaning, which is an inversion for those who haven't studied kind of existential philosophy of the more Greek approach to philosophy going all the way back, which was not ex post facto, not, hey, we exist, let's find some meaning, but what is the meaning? It doesn't really ask the question regarding our own existence. I think the other piece that comes with existential philosophy is a personal problem that I and many human beings experience, which is a sense of sadness or loneliness or ennui or rootlessness that comes with being human and saying, what is my purpose? And do I have a purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And is there meaning? And do I have a meaning? Right? When I feel low, when I feel sad, and when I feel frustrated or confused, I wonder what the point is. Why did God make me? And what is my purpose in the universe? And I think, and I write this somewhere in the book, there's something to the effect of like, I am a person who needs those little Post-it notes on the mirror that keep me going, right? I don't literally have a sign in my living room that says live, laugh, love, but I am the kind of person who thinks about those like little personal motivational bumper stickers to keep me going. And so to a great degree, this book and this essay in specific are for the person who has that sense of existential loneliness or kind of rootlessness or a feeling of like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I need to be reminded of what I'm doing all the time. Because life is hard, and sometimes it feels like you're stuck in the mire and that you're not going anywhere and that you're spinning the wheels. And it's really important. The line that just absolutely blew me away in this essay, and I will never forget as long as I live, is Hayetzer Sarich Laha'id Leyotzro. The creation has a need to testify to its creator. That you were made, human beings were created so magnificently and so wonderfully. Like even the most frustrated and depressed human being has such incredible capabilities ennobled in them by their creator that they should feel like they should be grateful and thankful and testify to their creator for all that they were made to be able to do. And I just love that idea that like, you don't need to get down on yourself. You should be so happy with how you were made that you should feel like singing out at every moment.
That's marvelous. Yes.
Thanks.
Rabbi Peg Kirschenbaum, who was my mentor and very influential on all these, on this book and on my novel in progress and just on my being, retired from our synagogue recently, and I wrote her a little prose poem. It's really a piece of prose called The Listening Tree, and it talks about a tree I visit on a regular basis. It's an old, craggy, crooked little tree. It almost looks like a bonsai tree became full size. That's, I have that feeling. I live in the Poconos, so I have that feeling about the nature that surrounds me, about the dogs around me, around the people around me. But it's also how I feel about writing. My purpose in life is to communicate and make connections, and it's something that I do. It's what I'm driven to do, and what I do. One of the major ways I do it is to write, and so to a certain extent, not quite because you come from a very God-loving place, and I come from a very human-loving place. But your God-loving place is human-loving. So it's that for me, these essays started as I struggled with these texts because I needed the texts to help me with my research with my novel in progress. And it evolved into wanting so desperately to share and experience the journey with other folks from diverse backgrounds. I wanted to hear their perspectives on things. And then I wanted to encourage them to explore and question together, so maybe we could participate in developing or synthesizing new ways of looking at these texts. And I began to understand how we could have millennia of generations of people fighting these texts and exploring these texts, and it just became a joy of our heritage and of who I might yet become. And then as I finished writing the book, the essay book, I'm still struggling with the novel, my hope for it has become that people will use it as a tool to better understand ourselves, each other, and our world, and to explore what direction we're choosing for our future. And I think that last part is very parallel to your book.
Mm.
It's like we're both looking to find the textures that others can then delve into and explore and grow through and learn from and share and develop with. But isn't that the Jewish tradition?
Yeah. And I think, like trying to find, there's a couple things going on there that I think both our books have in common, which is like finding yourself and finding your part of the narrative. And as it echoes and resembles some of the characters in Jewish tradition. So, your first essay, you're talking about how Eve is a character that a woman could relate to, or a person could relate to, because she makes choices about becoming, the decision to become a moral person and grow by taking on responsibility. But there are other characters, that throughout the Bible we can identify with. Your chapter on Miriam, and asking questions about stepping into leadership. Your second to last paragraph is, well, I loved this when I read it. While the publishing industry now has more women at the helm, I still find it much easier to stand up for others than myself. Some things seem to remain beyond my ability and nation confidence, such as self-promotion, that publishers expect authors to do. That's when I need to depend on my friends to help spread the word about my works. But at least now I know what I should be doing with respect for myself. Whereas Hillel said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Like reminding women that they're not the first generation or the first individual woman to stand up and advocate for themselves, but that Miriam is the archetype for that level of stepping in and being brave and being a leader. Is, it's a wonderful idea that echoes in my book a lot, where I'm kind of reminding you, our characters in our stories, you can resemble them too. They are you, you are them. They're not so much different than you, but they got recorded in a book and their stories get told over and over again each and every week. You are at least as magnificent as they are.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to stop. I love it. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been delightful chatting with you. I look forward to continuing our conversation.
I hope so.
My guest today was Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman, whose newest book is Life Lessons from Recently Dead Rabbis, Hashedut for the People. You can connect with Mark on his website, rabbimarkashergoodman.com, as well as on Twitter. And you can purchase his book and mine at your Buy It. That's your yourbayit.org and on Amazon. As for me, my two newest books are Daughters of Eve and also Of Being Woman, a collection of feminist science fiction from Noble Fusion Press. My website and blog are at sallywienergrotta.com. And my videos are also on my website as well as on YouTube, and you'll be able to see the one with Mark there. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and sometimes on Blue Sky. If you want to stay in touch with me, be among the first to read some of my new essays, and learn about other fascinating people I'm interviewing, please sign up at my website for my very occasional newsletter. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mark. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Sally. This was a lot of fun.